Hey guys, this is Miss Harlequin, and in this lesson, we're going to review how we can show deep thought in a written response. All right, so when we are writing about a text and using text evidence, what we want to do is make sure that we're not just summarizing the story or just listing our text evidence. A proper and effective response should have deep thought, which is also known as insightful analysis. So there's a couple of ways that you can include deep thought. You could elaborate on the evidence by adding a sentence where you say this shows or this proves something because. So for example, you might say this shows the character is angry because, and then you explain with your own interpretation how the evidence is actually revealing the character being angry. You could also explain the evidence with an inference. So you would add a sentence where you say something like, from this evidence, we can conclude that. From this evidence, we can conclude that the character is angry because when somebody slams a door and throws a book against a wall, they're usually doing that because they feel anger. Another way would be to connect the written evidence to the reader. So you would say something like, from this, the reader learns, the reader concludes, or the reader understands. So from the author's use of figurative language, the reader is able to understand just how annoyed the character's feeling. And then finally, another strategy would be to use or talk about author's craft. Saying something like, through the use of figurative language, or through the use of questioning, through the use of text structure, the author's revealing, describing, showing, or illustrating. And so what you're really doing there is you're taking the evidence, you're identifying a technique that the author's using with that particular part of the story, and then you're explaining the effect of that technique, a key idea that that technique is revealing to the reader. All right, so let's look at an example of a short response that has some deep thought in it. It comes from the passage Sweet Science Comes Baked In, which is from the 2013 New York State Common Core exam. And just to refresh our memories, in that passage, we read about a child named Morgan who dreams of becoming a food scientist. Morgan goes to Africa and studies how to make bread through experiments. And at the end of the passage, Morgan is about to start a job creating new foods with General Mills. All right, so the short response question is, why does the author choose to end the passage with, and that will be the sweetest cherry of all? Use two details from the passage to support your response. And so here we have a sample student response. And as I mentioned before, in this response, the student has included deep thought. The author probably chose to use this metaphor to show that what she accomplished will be the, quote, sweetest cherry. So it is comparing the cherries that she enjoyed in her grandfather's shop to her will be accomplished goal that will be the best experience ever. For example, my favorite thing was the maraschino cherries. I'd stick my hand into a tub and take home as many as I wanted. This shows that Riche enjoyed those cherries, as he said. I'd stick my hand into a tub and take home as many as I wanted. This also shows that since he likes those, he will enjoy the experience of her accomplishment. Another example is long before Morgan's food creations find their way to grocery store shelves. This shows what will be the sweetest cherry, which is her creation in stores for other people. To him, this is an experience he will enjoy like those cherries when he was younger. All right, so it's not a perfect response. However, there is an excellent use of text evidence, and there's an excellent use of deep thought. The very first deep thought comes in the second sentence when the student actually interprets the figurative language that the question is asking you to focus on. So one way to include deep thought is to actually interpret or explain the quote or the line that you're being asked to write about. And so in this case, since that original line is an example of figurative language, just interpreting and explaining what the figurative language means is deep thought. Another place where the student includes deep thought comes towards the end, where the student is actually taking the example from the text long before Morgan's food creations find their way to grocery shelves, and is then saying how this shows what will be the sweetest cherry. In the original text, the author never elaborates and tells you exactly what the sweetest cherry is. What the student is doing is taking the reference to Swedish Cherry, and the other line where it talks about what's going to happen in the future for Morgan and making a connection between those two ideas. And so here in the response where he explains the connection between those two ideas, that is the student interpreting and thinking deeply about the text. All right, let's look at another example. So here we're going to look at a short poem called The Playground and a short response question that's asking us, how does the poet use irony to develop the central idea of the playground? The playground. I'm too grown up for the playground, for these swings, where once I could pump my little legs and be a bird, when I was but an egg. I'm way too old here at the library, browsing through twice read tales in the teen section, to linger and listen to the story lady, and the tale of a cat called Beanie, and giggles like colored balloons. I'm mature beyond my years, my mind grapples with algebra, my spirit with the unforgiving equations that factor 13. Yet still I smile when, cruising among the channels, I chance upon an old familiar street, and hum along with Big Bird, counting patiently from 1 to 10. All right, so in this poem, I can see that the speaker is writing about how she is too grown up for the playground. She used to be an egg. This means when she was younger, and when she was younger, just an egg, she used to go on the swings and pump her legs and be a bird, pretend that she was older, she would fool around. She's too old now that she's at the library to visit with the story lady and listen to picture books being read aloud. She says that she's mature beyond her years, that she is busy doing algebra and working on equations. However, at the end of the poem, I noticed that she mentions that she still likes to watch An Old Familiar Street and hum along with Big Bird. So I know that's an allusion to Sesame Street. And so even though in the entire poem she's talked about how she's too old for childish things, she ends the poem talking about how she still enjoys when she sees Sesame Street on the TV. So right there I can see that that's irony. All right, so in a short response that answers this question, I would say the poet uses irony to develop the poem's central idea that the speaker is only feigning that they are too old for childhood things. So right here, you have the central idea, right? This poem is about somebody who thinks they're too old for childish things, but they're really just faking when they say that. And I'm going to prove that they're faking through the author's use of irony. For example, the speaker says he is too old for the playground, but then says, quote, I chance upon an old familiar street and hum along with Big Bird, counting patiently from 1 to 10. Now, this is ironic because based on what the speaker previously said, you would not expect them to watch Sesame Street. This proves that the speaker is not really too old to enjoy the things they loved as a child. So here, by explaining why or how the evidence I quoted is ironic and how I'm actually learning from it, or it's showing me that the speaker is only saying they're too old, they're not really, I'm showing my deep thought there. So just like in the previous one, I'm interpreting, I'm explaining, I'm putting my own thoughts into the evidence. That is my deep thought in my answer. Okay. The Ghost of Jean Lafitte. Now, we read this passage. We know it is about a soldier on his way home from war. He encounters the ghost of Jean Lafitte, who tries to get him to take his treasure. Now, if I had to answer a short response for this passage asking me how the author suggests that the pirate treasure is a trap, I would go back into the passage and I would try to find my evidence. That would be my first step. And I remember that from the original story, it was at this moment in the paragraph where Lafitte reached out to pull the young man toward his treasure. His grasp was cold and his hand was bloody. It was the hand of death. That was the moment in the story where I knew that taking the treasure was a bad idea. So in my response, I would write that the author suggests that the pirate treasure is a trap by including details that foreshadow the soldier's death. So right here you have my claim, you have my answer. Now you have my evidence. For example, when the pirate reaches for the soldier, the author describes the pirate's cold grasp and his hand was bloody. It was the hand of death. From these details, the reader can conclude that if the soldier takes the treasure, he will die. This foreshadows a terrible consequence for the soldier. So right here, you have a deep thought that is basically developed through an inference. I'm concluding from the detail, the hand being described as the hand of death, that taking the treasure is going to cause a soldier to die. It never says that directly in the passage, which is why it is a conclusion that I'm making. It's an inference I'm making based on the details that are there. So once again, I've included deep thought. All right, so now let's try it on your own. You'll see on the screen a poem from Langston Hughes called Dreams. It's one of his most famous poems. See if you can take this poem, take the short response question, how does the author develop the theme that dreams are a vital part of life? I've even begun the short response for you. I've restated the question. I've left you a blank space for your answer. I've left you space for you to give your text evidence, and then you want to just add one sentence where you show deep thought, and you want to make it one of these deep thought strategies. Now keep in mind that in a true short response, we would always want to have two pieces of evidence, but since we're just practicing using deep thought, we're just going to practice with one piece of text evidence.